It's time for the World Juniors, but have Sabre fans ever been less excited for the World Juniors than this season? We'll get into their prospects, prospect fatigue, and the number one overall pick, how valuable it is, and we have to have at least a little bit of a discussion on that as the Sabres find themselves near the bottom of the league. All ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, and thanks for making today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast your first listen. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are presented here on the show by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can get the season rolling into the new year with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase coming to you on a Friday edition of the show. The Sabres will be in action tonight against the New York Islanders. Sorry, I was looking at last week. They're playing Chicago Blackhawks tonight. We'll talk about that game next up on the show. But it's World Junior Week, and I wanted to talk a lot about the prospects today on this episode of the show. If you're looking for updates from the World Juniors, the games, updates on lines, injuries, and trades if they ever were to happen, you can check us out on our text line. JoinSubtext.com/LockedOnSabres is where you can check us out there. If you want to follow us on social media, I'm at Sneaky Joe and Blue Sky, at Sneaky Joe Sports on Twitter, and you can follow us at Locked On Sabres on Twitter as well. So a lot to get to on today's show. The Sabres are looking for a second win in a row. This is being recorded a little bit later on Friday, so I'm assuming a lot of you have already seen the game by the time you are listening to this, and we'll have a show for you on that next time over the weekend. So that's coming up, and they've got a schedule here in front of them where, like, all right, let's go. Get a couple of wins. Let's get the season at least interesting. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. The best way I can continue to put it, you got to be a football fan too to understand the context here, but the most optimistic way I can put it for the Sabres playoff chances are their odds right now to make the postseason at FanDuel Sportsbook are roughly the same, and they've dropped a little bit, so they're a little lower now, but the other day when we did this, they are roughly the same as the Green Bay Packers odds to win the Super Bowl. I find it hard to be more optimistic than that. It's a good team that's going to be on the road in the NFL playoffs. So, that's the best you're going to be able to do. 111-point pace. But let's keep an eye on the future on today's show. The World Juniors in Ottawa. I love the World Juniors, mostly because I love international hockey. I'm a sucker for hockey with the flags. That's it. Slap a U.S. flag on one uniform, slap a Canadian flag on the other, put them head to head, and most times I'm going to be in. Especially when, I don't love the World Championships. I don't love those lower level tournaments, the U18s, whatnot, because I do want the feeling that others care, that there's energy in the building, that there's a packed house to go to these games that are going to be on an international flavor. And the World Juniors do give you that. In Canada, especially when they're in Finland, those places are circuses, those arenas when the Finns are playing in their home country. We know what Canada's like. And the U.S. is pretty good, too, in this regard. The last World Juniors here in Buffalo weren't so great for this, but most times it has been. And actually, even that tournament, I know that the attendance wasn't the same in 2018, but when Casey Middlestat scored at KeyBank Center to beat Slovakia and scored like a highlight reel Bobby Orr-esque goal, it wasn't a full house. It probably was like 12,000, 13,000 in the building that night. Jumped out of their seats like a Sabres playoff goal. So it can give you moments. It can give you energy, and I love the international flavor of it. We'll get to the Sabre prospects that you should be watching at these World Juniors and what they've already done through 24 hours, 36 hours of this tournament so far. Konsta Helenius, Maxim Strebak, Brody Ziemer, Anton Wahlberg are going to be the guys that we focus in on the most. Those are the top Sabre prospects there. There are a couple of others that we'll update you on as well. And then we'll get to James Hagens, who is probably going to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NHL Draft. And I got a thought on the Sabres, the top of the draft, where they are in the standings, and this kid that's going to probably go number 1, who, by the way, he opened his World Juniors with a 4-point night, albeit against Germany. Where I wanted to start, though, is just kind of a broader look at where we all are with the Sabres and this tournament and prospects in general. When there's development camps, when there's the Prospects Challenge, when there's the World Juniors, we used to, as a community and as a fan base, get up for all of that. At least I did, and I know a lot of other people did. Where, I mean, if you go back to the middle of the drought, especially when they are exiting the tank, the Sabres coming out of the tank, with Eichel and Reinhart and with Ristolainen still kind of a prospect and Zadorov before that. Like, they had these loads and loads of prospects, Comfear and Armia, like so many. And there was a night at KeyBank Center. There are a lot of nights like this. There was a night at KeyBank Center where Jack Eichel, playing in a prospect scrimmage, filled up the arena. Packed house. Almost no empty seats in the entire building to watch Eichel, and then a little bit of Reinhart too, because that would have been pretty new on the scene for him. But mostly it was about Jack. That building filled up for players that weren't yet in the NHL. The year before that, at the Erie Otters game against the Niagara Ice Dogs, this city hosted an OHL game, the Ontario Hockey League, a city that right now is so disappointed in their hockey team that it's hard to see that building full for the NHL. The OHL got a good turnout to watch Connor McDavid and just the hope of McDavid that season in the building. Before that, I remember being at a U.S. All Prospects game. That would have been Eichel again. But before Eichel would have been Buffalo's, before they would have drafted him while he was still a prospect at Boston College, before he was drafted. And I remember probably for that one, maybe more like 8,000, 9,000 to watch just Eichel. I mean, nobody else. I don't remember anybody else knowing any other people in that game. I remember Drew Stafford coming out and awarding Eichel the MVP of that game. Like, those two, McDavid and Eichel, obviously had a big buzz about the city, but it was more than that. I mean, the World Juniors here in 2011 was a big event. Like, the arena was full all the time, and the Canada Russia gold medal game was a huge event downtown, and that building was packed. A lot of Canadian fans came down for that, but there was a little bit of a buzz in the city for those World Juniors. And as the years progressed, development camps too, right? Like, when they went to Harbor Center, I remember the Harbor Center rink being full for 3-on-3 scrimmages for different practices and tournaments in the summer. Like, those things would fill up. And then as the years progressed and the drought grew older, less and less people started coming to the development camp. Less and less people would start coming to the Prospects Challenge. Fewer and fewer people would come out to the 2018 World Juniors that were here. Again, attendance was not as good for that tournament as it was in 2011. It's the Sabres. The Sabres have done this to us. There is no doubt at all that there is severe prospect fatigue in Buffalo, and it is 1,000% deserved. Like, it is. Fans of an NHL team, I mean, this is once dubbed hockey heaven by Ted Black. Part of that then was, look how much these fans care. They care deeper than the NHL club. They'll care about what guys are doing down in Rochester. They'll care about, guys that are at the World Juniors. And that is dried up. But most teams don't have that in the first place, I guess. But for here, it's more about just the fatigue of it all. There is so much fatigue. And that's where I want to kind of get into the World Juniors this go round, because I love that tournament. And it's kind of hard for me to watch it. I will watch it when it's the big clubs, and I will watch it in the name of USA Canada. I love that matchup. I want that matchup in every tournament I can get it. But watching it for Sabre prospects, I mean, I'm doing it now because I want to know about these guys for the sake of this podcast and covering the team. But from an entertainment value, for a level of getting excited, there's none of that. I don't care about that at all. In the past, I remember when Middlestat tore up the 11 World Juniors. I remember when Nick Baptiste was tearing up the OHL. Not everybody goes that deep on it, but I would. And it was more so because I wanted to feel good about the hockey team. And now, it's almost like a non-event. Konsta Helenius could rip up this tournament, and it wouldn't make me feel any better about the team. Anton Wahlberg for Sweden could destroy this tournament, look like a man amongst boys, and it just wouldn't make me feel any better about the Buffalo Sabres at all. And they've done that to us because it's been round and round and round of this prospect and that prospect. And for the 7th time since the Sabres have made the playoffs, blank is ranking the Sabres as the number 1 prospect pool in the National Hockey League. That really, I think, is where it comes from. We are constantly hearing for 14 years from those that know, and I would fully believe are doing a good job of covering these things. They will tell you the Sabres have one of the best prospect pools in the league. For 14 years, we've been hearing that. And it is yet to pay off. And we are on the 4th generation of prospects. When the Sabres last made the playoffs, their prospects were Mark Pysyk, who has gone on to begin and end his NHL career. He's had a long career that is now over. Zach Kassian was one of the Sabres' top prospects. Again, had a career in the NHL. It's now over. Tyler Myers, he's still going, I guess, just played his 1,000th game. Tyler Ennis, played, done. These were the prospects. The Portland Pirates were their AHL affiliate the last time they made the postseason. Joel Armia. Joel Armia is after the draft. He's almost done with his NHL career, I bet. It's just fatigue. Over and over. These were their prospects the last time that they made the playoffs. So I completely empathize and understand with any fan that used to care a lot and now just can't get excited for it. Because what's the sarcastic thing to say? What's the snarky thing to say is, oh, good, I'm going to watch the World Juniors. I'm going to go watch the Sabre players that are going to disappoint me in 2028. That'll be fun. That's where we're at. So until the NHL club has real success, I find it hard to believe that the buzz around a tournament like this is going to return when it comes to the Sabres perspective of it. All that being said, I do want to get into what is going on and who is at this tournament for the Sabres and who you might disagree with me wholeheartedly. You might be ready for this. And I sound like a party pooper right now. Well, for you, I do want to go through these players. I want to logically and look through these guys, what they are as players, what they're going to do with the World Juniors, what they've already done at the World Juniors, and only very, very limited sample size. So we'll go through some of the Sabres' top prospects, who's there in Ottawa when we come back on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, of course, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easier to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pickmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week on PrizePicks, check out the hockey board. Whether you're looking at Connor McDavid for more than 4 shots on goal during the week, or whether it's Leon Draisaitl for assists. It's so simple. Make your picks, have fun, while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly at PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. The World Juniors are underway in Ottawa, and we are on night 2 right now. And at time of recording, all the Sabre prospects are done for the day. Only missing here Canada and Latvia, which does not feature any of the Sabre prospects. So just a list of who's there, and then who I think you should be paying more attention to if you are interested. Let's start with the top pick of the Buffalo Sabres of this past draft class. Konsta Helenius from Finland, first round pick in 2024 of the Sabres. He is 2 games in to his tournament so far. Tough matchup last night against Canada. He looked good. He looked like he was deserving of being on the ice for sure. He looked like someone to me that, had he been Canadian, would be on that team. But the team around him, of course, is just a little bit subpar at every position, and Canada just had the advantages. So with all that being said, there's only so much he could do against Canada to me, because he's kind of out in his own. You really saw the talent. You really saw the skill on the power play. I thought Helenius moving the puck around. He's on the wall, but everything on that Finnish power play moves through him. He certainly, to me, looks like the best player on the ice for Finland. So that's good to see. 1 assist through 2 games so far is all, though, for Helenius. Not yet stacking up the points. Again, Canada being your first opponent can kind of deflate that a little bit. Anton Wahlberg. These are the 2 Rochester guys. Helenius down in Rochester, Wahlberg down in Rochester this year. Team Sweden, second-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres last year in the 2023 NHL Draft. Big kid, obviously. He is a good two-way guy, and at 6 foot, 195. He's a little thicker than a lot of the kids there. Wahlberg looks like an adult playing against children at times. Again, he is not towering over them, but you can't take him off the puck. He can throw you off the puck with ease. Wahlberg, and there's a hockey sense there in his own end that you see on display. Today against Kazakhstan, 1 goal and 2 assists. The opposite of Helenius playing Canada. You should probably put up 3 points against Kazakhstan. He did lead the team in points, though, at the center position. So Wahlberg, someone to keep an eye on. He in Rochester this year, 10 points in 25 games. I think he's trending towards being an NHL player. Bottom 6 center, I would guess at. But Wahlberg is somebody to keep an eye on going forward. Maxim Strebak, defenseman for Slovakia, playing college hockey this year, is another name to keep an eye on. Strebak, 2 assists on the tournament so far from the blue line, and he puts up his points. So if you are going to watch Slovakia play any of these other top countries, I want to see these guys more against the top opponents, the top competitors. It's cool to put up a bunch of numbers against the lower level teams, but what do you do when you play Canada? What do you look like when you play the US? What do you look like when you play Sweden? It's kind of like when, maybe this is an example, maybe when it doesn't work, but when Josh Allen was a prospect for Wyoming, a lot of focus was made about, okay, well, you play at Wyoming, you play against all these Mount West teams. What would you do against Iowa? What'd you do against Oregon? What'd you do against these top teams when you played them? That's kind of what I'm looking for at this tournament, because there is a huge disparity in talent from the top teams to the bottom teams. You're never going to see these kids and the bottom feeder teams in the NHL. Like maybe one or two of them. The guys at the top of this tournament, though, you are going to see. And what do you look like when you play them? And Strebak looked really good in his first 2 games for Slovakia. They get the win against Switzerland today, 2-1, and he's got 2 assists on the tournament so far. Second round pick of the Buffalo Sabres last year. Another name to keep an eye on. And then if I'm doing a top 4 here, kind of a Mount Rushmore of this, really the 4 that I'm hyper focusing on the most. Brody Zemer And mostly for him because I really think the Sabres need some goal scorers to start developing in the system. And he had 2 goals in his opening game against Germany. Again, we'll see what he looks like against the tougher competition, but a good start for him. Both around the net. Tipped one on a backhand on the power play. Nice finish by Ziemer there. And then the other one was just him in front, whacking away at it, being where the goals are scored, and then finding a way to punch it in. So that's really what you're looking at for the top Sabres. The other ones there that I did not mention, Adam Kleber, second-round pick in 2024, plays for Team USA, defenseman. And then Norwin Panocha, who's a seventh-round pick in 2023. So maybe the least interesting of the Sabre prospects at the tournament. But if you're happen to catch Germany, look for Panocha. When we come back, I want to get to James Hagens, the number 1 overall pick, expected to be number 1 overall pick of the 2025 NHL Draft. How he looked in his opening game, what he looks like as a player, his comparison, and now the Sabres are at the bottom of the standings, what it would mean to get him. I got a take coming on this where I think the Sabres are going to need to win a lottery before they get good. That's where I'm at. We'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hockey back after the holiday break, so you got a lot of options there. You can look at all your Buffalo hockey games for this, but you can look around the league as well. And with the NFL getting closer and closer, start looking at some playoff bets. Playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel, so many ways to pick up a W. You can pick on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. Which players will, score a touchdown. I had in Premier League yesterday a draw. I was rooting for a draw. I got it, by the way. So you can even have fun with that. You can root for things not to happen with unders, which I also like to do. So check it all out. FanDuel Sportsbook ahead of the playoffs. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, little Prospects World Junior edition of the show. We talked about the Sabres prospects, talked about just how I'm fatigued with it all for the most part. But, once the tournament does get going, I do get back into it a little bit because I'm reminded of how much I love international hockey, and you do love the hope. If you can work your way to being hopeful about this team for any reason at all, you do you. I'm happy for you. I wish I could do the same at 100% like I used to. Well, it's going to be a 14th year of the playoff drought, almost certainly. And the Sabres are near the bottom of the standings. Not dead last, but near the bottom. They could be a team that finishes last. I got into it with somebody on Twitter a couple weeks ago about this. Like, I think they're capable of finishing dead last. And NT Ryder on Twitter, if you follow Kevin, he's a really good follow. He's like, I don't think so. Dahlin, too good. Thompson, too good. Luukkonen, too good. And I kind of backed off, and they're like, that's probably right. That's probably right. Like the Sabres tank teams of 10 years ago now did not have players of that caliber. Tyler Ennis was the best forward. He's not Tage Thompson. Matt Hackett was playing goaltender. It was not Luukkonen. That being said, since then, Dahlin's been dealing with injuries, and he has since the beginning of training camp. So if he's going to have an injury-plagued season, we went through the numbers earlier this week and last week. The Sabres with and without Dahlin, even an injured Dahlin, are stark. And Luukkonen, if Luukkonen's going to have the year he's having, a down year, then that's a big problem. It's a big problem. Now, to me, they could finish last the way that they're looking. I am at a point where I do not believe, with the general manager in place, with the lack of ability to make moves, both by willingness from the organization, a killer instinct from the organization, and the combined factors of players that don't want to come here, players that have no movement clause that are going to exercise that leverage to not play here, and the stink of the organization, the stink of the whole thing. It's just It's a bad scene, and it looks like the Sabres might be stuck. Players that are signed here for a long time that might not be the proper players of the core. They look like they might be stuck. This is a worry of mine. It also is, I think, a reality. I really don't think the Sabres fully climb out of the spot they're in as an organization until they get lucky and they win another lottery. And when I say they win another lottery, I might have to be picky about this. I don't mean an Owen Power lottery. I like Owen Power a lot. I'll be one of the first people to defend him. I think he is doing just fine in his development as a player. I think he's had a very good season. He is still lacking in some areas, no doubt. But I'm on board with Owen Power. Owen Power is not one of the higher level number 1 overall picks. That's a lottery you won, and it's like, okay, well, this is the year that I won. The Sabres need to win a lottery in a year where there's a franchise-altering forward. And more than that, hopefully a center. But I'll stick with forward. A franchise-altering forward. A guy that's on the level of McDavid would be tremendous. That never happens, though. McDavid's a once-in-a-century player. Matthews, guy of that caliber. Eichel, another guy of that caliber. Someone like that. The player, until that happens, maybe the Sabres get lucky one year and they make the postseason, they squeak in. I don't think they'll be a consistently great hockey team until they do what the Oilers did. The Oilers just got lucky one year, and it changed everything. They won the lottery 5 times, right? Something like that. And finally, on the 5th attempt, the 5th try, the 5th time they won it, this time, it was like, they won the lottery. They got the scratch-off tickets, right? And, okay, you scratch off, and, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. That's $50 on the scratch-off. And then Nail Yakupov. Oh, that's like 80 cents. Thanks. Taylor Hall. Oh, cool. That's $1,000. I won $1,000 on the lottery ticket. How exciting. McDavid. That's Mega Millions. That's the $1 billion lottery pool is what McDavid is. The Sabres. Dahlin. That's pretty good. Again, like he might be even higher level than Taylor Hall. Maybe I'll give him roughly the same. You want $10,000? Awesome. I'm gonna pay off the car. $10,000 for Dahlin. That's what that lottery win was. That's a lottery win. Power. Oh, cool. $500. Go on a trip, maybe. Spend some spending money. If they what they need is a Mega Millions. They need a Mega Millions. For them to get to being like a consistently great hockey team. It's the Oilers model. It was the 76ers in the NBA. They won the number 1 overall pick a bunch of times. They really only got a great player one time. The Sabres this year, I don't know where we're at on this. James Hagens is the player that is expected to be number 1 overall. Doing a lot of research on him, watching his first game of the World Juniors against Germany, looking back at some of his U.S. development program games and what he's done at Boston College in a limited sample so far this year. Over a point a game player, though. Hagens looks great. I like him a lot. Now, there are going to be limitations here. He is a little bit smaller. He is not, well, let's compare him to Eichel. Eichel was an American top prospect that if McDavid wasn't that year, Eichel would have been a number 1 overall pick that went to Boston College and was above a point a game player as a center. The difference between an Eichel and an Hagens is size. Eichel is 6'2", Hagens is 5'11". Eichel maybe 15 pounds bigger than Hagens at this stage of their careers. It's just a little bit of a smaller player in James Hagens. The path might be similar, body type a little bit different. Hagens, so Eichel's not the comparison. For me, and this is not just me because I've read this comparison a bunch from different people, it might be Jack Hughes. The guy that is going number 1 overall this year, James Hagens, might be on the level of a Jack Hughes. That is sorely needed by the Sabres. I'm not saying they have to finish last. I'm saying eventually they're going to have to get lucky. And maybe this is the year where, hey, you have a 7% chance at getting the number 1 overall pick. And, you got it from the 5th pick or the 4th pick. Hagens, watching him against Germany, you see the sheer quickness. You see how fast he can move side to side with his skates and his hands. He is a great stick handler. You see the release. Now, that's something I guess that he's gotten better at, that maybe he needed to get better at, and he already has before he's reached the NHL level, because that was one of the first things that jumped off to me was his release. The goal he scores against Germany yesterday, the puck flies off his stick. Looked like Matthews a little bit. But reading a little bit more about him, like that was something he had to improve on that maybe wasn't so good a year or two ago. All that being said, Hagens looks like a prize. I don't know that he's a McDavid prize, but if he can be the level of a Jack Hughes, I would consider that a franchise altering player. I would. Not like a sure thing. McDavid was a sure thing. You have that player for long enough, you could be as bad as you want building around him. You're going to win. Eichel, little lower, right? Like Eichel is amazing, but you got to do some things right around him. He's not McDavid or Gretzky. And Vegas did, and he won the cup. Jack Hughes, he's great. He is not McDavid. You got to do stuff around him. You got to have the right roster around him, but he can be the best player on a great hockey team. And he's proven that with the Devils already. 99 points 2 years ago would have been that 43 goals. And if James Hagens can be that, then he's a real prize at the end of the day for the Sabres or whoever would end up winning that number 1 overall pick. This is not me endorsing the Sabres tanking. This is not me saying you have to think about this guy on a day in, a day out basis. Just in the back of your mind, think about, what's at stake this upcoming draft, and really just your thoughts on the overall idea for me that they could maybe be a team that one day squeaks in the playoffs with this roster, but they don't seem capable of getting elite players on their own. I think the only way you're going to get it is you got to get lucky. And this kid would be pretty good for that. If the Sabres were to win or finish where they are right now, they are 3rd from the bottom in the NHL. That would be an 11.5% chance at the number 1 overall pick. So again, just kind of a check-in on all of this. I'm not telling you got to think about this on a day-to-day basis, who the number 1 pick is. You don't have to go to tankathon.com and sim the lottery every day for the next 4 months. Just a quick reminder that there is a guy playing at the World Juniors to keep an eye on who's going to go number 1 overall, and he looks pretty dynamite. All right, that's going to do it for us today here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. We'll talk about the Sabres and Hawks the next time we talk one of the worst teams in hockey. So enjoy that, and we'll talk to you next time here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Be sure to check out Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, has got you covered for Bills and Jets, and Steal and Flip got you covered for Locked On Fantasy Hockey throughout the week. Talk to you next time here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.